I'd like to tell you a story about a customer who took her vehicle into a shop to get an oil change performed on it. She was getting ready to go on a trip to Dallas, Texas, where about midway through, after her oil change was done, about 2.5 hours out of San Antonio, her serpentine belt snaps on her and breaks in half. Needless to say, she was frustrated. She winds up calling the manager and indicating her frustrations on the manager. The manager obviously came back and apologized and offered a resolution. Unfortunately, she was nowhere near a shop within a 12-mile radius. So she winds up calling a tow truck. She had to wait for the tow truck driver to come back and pick her up and take her over to a repair facility, where she then got the belt replaced over there at the repair facility. So she was frustrated, number one. Number two, she had to pay for a tow truck service. Number three, she had to pay parts and labor to get the vehicle replaced so she can get back on the road to Dallas, Texas. And all those costs could have been prevented had she had the technician previously had indicated that on the work order that she needed to have her serpentine belt replaced. So that's kind of not something that really wants to take place normally in a facility, but for whatever reason, don't know the circumstances behind it, that's what happened. And that's why I'm going to explain to you today and go to the procedures on how to do an oil change properly. My name is Joe Valague, and that's going to be my speech that I'm going to present to you today, is how to do an oil change properly. Okay. The general public knows that when they buy a vehicle, one of the most serviceable items is the oil change. Okay. The oil change procedure has been evolved to a more safety and more complex procedure than most customers think. Customers say, well, oil change is easy. You just drain the fluid, put a new filter, make sure you top it off with good fluid and the correct amount, and you're good to go, and that's it. Well, it's not all about that, okay? There's a lot more involved in doing that. And there's 19 steps that I have to present to you that are gonna cover those areas that we need to be concerned with when you do a correct oil change. Number one, the general safety rules regarding doing an oil change is to make sure, and I have them right here, some safety glasses and some nitro gloves. You want to try and see if you can buy some of these guys here. You never do an oil change, you never work under the car without any safety glasses. Safety is the utmost concern for the technician's safety anytime they're working on a vehicle. Also, the oil is the same temperature as coolant, so you might have to wait a little bit for it to cool down, because it's the same temperature as coolant, which can get hot, which can cause second and third degree burns. The other thing is, and the reason why we wear our gloves is because oil is carcinogenic. It's a cancer agent. So we need to make sure that we wear our safety gloves and we wash our hands frequently. Okay, so if we're going down the line here, some of the things and the main points that we're going to cover, just to give you a little preview. Number one, safety concerns, lifting the vehicle up at a properly safe level. Make sure we're having the oil type and the capacity of the oil at a safe level for the customer. We're going to start the engine up and ensure that the oil pressure gauge goes up, typically about 20 to 40 psi at idle. Okay, and make sure there's no leaks. And finally, the last thing we're going to talk about here is resetting that light back to 100%. Okay. All right. So step one in the process is, number one, make sure we're wearing our PPE, personal protective equipment. We kind of cover that quite a bit, especially in the classes here. Number two, oil again is carcinogenic. So we got to make sure that we wash our hands frequently. When we're lifting a vehicle, make sure we lift it up properly. The lifting points are specific for manufacturers, so there's a certain way on lifting a vehicle safely and properly and supporting it safely and properly. So we need to make sure we're doing that right. Never lift a vehicle on an incline or decline. We see it time and time again on the news where a car comes down crushing and killing somebody. Either maybe because they didn't use jack stands, or they were lifting or lowering a vehicle on an incline or decline. So never do that. That's just like an accident waiting to happen. Okay. Select the appropriate socket that we're going to be needing and using to take off that drain bolt, and also an oil filter pliers as well. Okay, we're going to start up by taking the drain bolt off, loosen it up, taking it off slowly. Make sure you have some safety, some shop towels with you. Let that oil drain into the drain pan. While that's draining, you're going to look at the oil filter and get the oil filter pliers and remove the oil filter carefully. When you take the oil filter off, we want to make sure that the O-ring seal that's on top comes out with it. Okay, we'll talk about that after a while here as to why that needs to happen. The other thing is, when we're doing that, we're going to go ahead and do a 28-point checklist. A lot of dealerships do that to ensure the safety of the vehicle. If there's any concerns regarding safety, like with the belt that I mentioned in my story, it needs to be replaced. Well, let's recommend it to the customer so we can get it taken care of. Or if a hose is leaking, well, let's repair it before it blows up on the customer prior to going on a road trip. So the dealership has a 28-point checklist. Some of them have a 32-point checklist that they have to undergo, and the technician is required to go step by step and check off every one of those things and inspection items for the safety of the customer's vehicle. And if they don't do that, and something like this happens to where their vehicle gets stranded, and it's because they forgot to check the belts or they forgot to check the hoses. Well, now it's on the technician. Now they have to explain why they didn't do their job properly, which would not be good. Okay, so after the 28-point checklist, okay, we're going to go ahead and replace the drain bolt, tighten it up to specifications. We're going to get the oil filter, do the same thing. Before we do that, we're going to lubricate the top of part of that oil seal with a light coat of oil, and that ensures a good seal when we tighten it up by hand. Do not, under any circumstances, tighten that oil filter with the oil filter pliers that you use to remove the oil filter. Okay, you will put a little pinhole in it, so when you start up the engine, oil is going to leak out pretty fast. So we just ruined a brand new oil filter when you do that, so never do that. Okay, the other thing what we're going to do is we're going to lower the vehicle down, and then we're going to correctly put the right amount and type of fluid into the crankcase. The correct type and capacity of what that vehicle calls for is something that we need to make sure that we put in there properly, and we do not overfill it or underfill the oil. And we're going to do that and start it up and check it. As soon as we start it up though, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that oil pressure gauge goes up. It should go up between 20 to 40 pounds of pressure, which is ideal. The next thing we're going to want to do is go down there and make sure the oil is not leaking. We do not want to have any oil leaks. If it didn't come in with oil leaks, we're not going to let it come out with oil leaks, especially excessive oil leaks, because of the fact that maybe we might have not tightened that drain bolt properly, or we didn't tighten up that oil filter properly. So we're just trying to cover our tracks and make sure everything's okay with that. Okay. After that is done, then we're going to go ahead and shut the engine off, recheck the oil level again. If everything checks out good, then we're going to go ahead and reset that light to 100%. When we set it to 100%, and there's different ways of doing that, always refer to the manufacturer's specifications on doing that. We're going to make sure that that light turns off, because that's the reason why the vehicle came in. It came in because the light was on. And normally when the light comes on, it's because it's at a 0%. So restoring it to 100%, it will turn off the light for us. Okay. So to review some of the things that we talked about, again, number one, PPE, safety. Make sure you have your safety glasses, and make sure you have nitro gloves. Nitro gloves are the best ones to use out there. Number two, lifting a vehicle. Make sure we're having the lifting points properly. Make sure we're supporting it with jack stands. Filling the oil capacity and the type of oil is key and critical to the manufacturers. Starting the engine. Make sure the engine starts up. There's no noise. The pressure gauge goes up. Number one. Number two, make sure there's no leaks. So you got to get down there and make sure there's no oil leaks present on the ground. And then the last thing is resetting that oil light. Okay. As I stated again, the general public understands and knows that when they buy a vehicle, the most serviceable item is the oil change procedure. Okay. The oil change procedure has evolved to a more safety and more complex procedure than most customers think. So just kind of keep that in mind with the story I mentioned to you earlier. I hope you learned something today about what we did and talked about. on the oil change procedure. I hope it helps you out with maybe your own personal vehicles, or at least if you don't do the oil changes, when you go and take it to a repair facility, you know that this should be taking place. Okay. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with me. Thank you very much.